The sun poured gently through the large windows of the small cafe, casting a warm glow on the polished wooden tables and the soft hum of conversation. It was one of those quiet afternoons when the cafe seemed to have its own rhythm. A gentle dance of baristas steaming milk, customers chatting softly, and waitstaff moving between tables with trays in their hands. The smell of freshly baked pastries mingled with the rich aroma of coffee, creating a cozy and inviting atmosphere. At one corner of the cafe, a young waitress moved gracefully between the tables. Her hair was tied neatly, and her apron was spotless. She smiled at each customer, taking their orders and carrying plates with a light, confident step. She had been working at this cafe for a few years, and though it was not a large place, it felt like a little world of its own, filled with familiar faces and regulars who always greeted her by name. On this particular afternoon, the calm rhythm of the cafe was interrupted by the entrance of a man who seemed out of place. He was a tourist, well-dressed, carrying a small leather satchel. His eyes scanned the cafe with curiosity, and there was a certain confidence in the way he walked, as if he was used to being noticed. He approached the counter, smiling politely at the staff, but there was a glint in his eyes that suggested he was looking for more than just a cup of coffee. The waitress noticed him immediately. She had seen many tourists before, some polite, some confused by the menu, but there was something different about this man. He looked like he had a challenge in mind, a test waiting to happen. She straightened her posture slightly, ready to assist him as she always did, with a professional smile on her face. The man spoke softly, almost to himself, but loud enough for the waitress to hear. He uttered words in a strange, rare language, one that she had only heard a few times before. Most people would have looked puzzled, perhaps even laughed nervously, but she remained calm, her expression neutral, as if she understood exactly what was happening. The other customers noticed the exchange. Some leaned back in their chairs, curious, sensing that something unusual was about to unfold. Whispers floated across the cafe like tiny waves. "Did you hear that language?" And, "I wonder what he's trying to do." The atmosphere shifted slightly, from casual comfort to intrigued attention. Everyone felt the tension in the air, subtle but undeniable. The tourist smiled faintly, watching her closely. He seemed to expect confusion, maybe even embarrassment. He had prepared himself to be impressed only by her hesitation, believing that no ordinary waitress could respond to such a rare language. There was a quiet challenge in his eyes, a test waiting to see if she would falter. The waitress, however, remained calm. She didn't rush, didn't fumble with her words, and didn't show a hint of nervousness. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, listening carefully, her mind working quickly to interpret what he had said. There was a brief pause, a moment that stretched for a second or two, but it was filled with quiet confidence rather than hesitation. The tourist leaned back slightly, crossing his arms, clearly enjoying the suspense. Other customers watched, their interest peaked. Some held their coffee cups a little tighter, some shifted in their chairs, trying to catch every detail of the interaction. The cafe, usually filled with the soft buzz of conversation and clinking dishes, fell into a hushed attention, like the audience waiting for a performance to begin. The waitress responded, speaking in the same rare language. Her words were clear and precise, as if she had been speaking this language her whole life. She answered his question without hesitation, and the confidence in her voice carried a subtle elegance that immediately captured everyone's attention. The tourist's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise passing across his face. He had expected confusion, maybe even a stutter, but instead he found a perfect response. A quiet murmur ran through the cafe. Customers glanced at one another, their eyes wide with surprise. Some whispered softly, "She actually understood him," and "How is that possible?" The waitress continued to smile, maintaining her calm demeanor, answering politely yet perfectly, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. The tourist, realizing that his challenge was met with unexpected skill, paused. He tried to think of another question, one that might test her further. The waitress remained poised, her attention focused entirely on him. It was clear that she was not only competent but also confident in her abilities. Her background and knowledge were hidden beneath her simple uniform and ordinary appearance, waiting for this precise moment to reveal themselves. As the interaction continued, the cafe seemed to fade into the background. The soft chatter and clinking dishes became almost irrelevant as everyone focused on the exchange between the waitress and the tourist. The young woman's composure and intelligence shone brightly, leaving a subtle yet powerful impression on everyone present. The tourist's initial confidence began to waver, replaced by genuine admiration. He had underestimated her, and now he was faced with the reality that she was extraordinary in ways he hadn't anticipated. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted from curiosity to awe. The patrons could feel it in the way she spoke, in the way she maintained eye contact, and in the effortless manner with which she handled his challenge. Her professionalism, intelligence, and poise combined into a presence that was hard to ignore. Everyone sensed that they were witnessing something rare, something memorable. Finally, after a few more exchanges, the tourist leaned back and smiled, this time without the edge of challenge. He nodded in acknowledgement, a silent gesture of respect for her skill. The other customers, still watching, began to relax, some even smiling, sensing that the test had reached its conclusion. The cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy had changed. There was a quiet admiration in the air, a subtle respect for the young waitress who had met an unusual challenge with grace and intelligence. The waitress returned to her duties, serving other customers with the same calm professionalism, her earlier display now part of the cafe's invisible background. Yet, the memory of her perfect response lingered. Patrons who had witnessed the moment whispered to each other, sharing their amazement and spreading the story in small circles. It was the kind of encounter that people remembered and talked about long after they had left, a reminder that talent and confidence often appear in the most unexpected places. By the time the afternoon sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, the cafe had resumed its gentle hum. But the story of the tourist and the waitress had already taken root in the minds of everyone who had been there. A simple interaction, a rare language, and a perfect reply had transformed an ordinary day into an unforgettable experience. It was a quiet yet powerful reminder that sometimes, the most extraordinary moments are hidden within the ordinary, waiting for the right time to emerge and leave everyone silent in admiration. The afternoon continued to move forward, but the energy in the cafe had shifted. Patrons who were quietly sipping coffee or typing on their laptops now kept glances toward the young waitress and the tourist who remained near the counter. There was a gentle tension in the air, a curiosity that could be felt in the soft hum of conversation, like everyone was waiting for something extraordinary to unfold. The tourist, still confident but with a trace of curiosity in his expression, decided to continue the challenge. He leaned slightly closer to the counter, his eyes never leaving the waitress. In his hands he held a small booklet, filled with phrases and sentences from the rare language. He flipped to a random page, scanning it quickly as he formulated his next question. It was more complicated than the first, filled with unusual grammar and words that few people would recognize or understand. The waitress noticed the booklet and did not flinch. She watched the tourist carefully, her mind processing the words she had heard earlier and the new question that now came her way. Her fingers tightened around the pen she held, not nervously, but in preparation. She had learned this language from her grandfather, who had always believed in teaching her the beauty and complexity of words. This rare knowledge had been quietly tucked away, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Today, that moment had come. The tourist spoke clearly, the words flowing smoothly but with an intention behind them. Each phrase was meant to confuse, to test her ability to think quickly under pressure. But the waitress listened attentively, her ears catching every subtle tone and nuance. She did not respond immediately, taking a measured pause, not out of uncertainty, but to ensure that her reply would be precise and flawless. The cafe seemed to hold its breath, the background noise fading as if the space itself had become a silent stage for this interaction. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, confident, and perfectly articulated. She responded in the rare language, answering the tourist's complex question as if it were a simple one. Her pronunciation was flawless, each word placed carefully, each phrase carrying clarity and meaning. The tourist's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. He had expected hesitation, perhaps even a misstep, but she delivered her answer with grace and ease. The patrons around them began to react subtly. A woman at a nearby table whispered to her friend, "Did she just answer that perfectly?" A man at the counter leaned forward slightly, trying to catch every word. The cafe, usually filled with ordinary chatter, had become a quiet audience to an extraordinary display of skill. The waitress maintained her composure, returning a small, polite smile, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. The tourist, now realizing that this was not a simple encounter, decided to push further. He asked another question, this time more complicated and obscure, challenging not just her language skills, but her ability to understand context and nuance. The young waitress listened carefully, her mind working quickly to decode the structure and intent behind his words. She responded without pause, her answer once again flawless, leaving no room for doubt. The cafe was silent, every patron captivated by the scene unfolding before them. Some whispered softly to each other, sharing their amazement, while others simply watched in stunned silence. The young waitress had transformed a simple cafe into a place of wonder, her calm demeanor and skill commanding respect and admiration. It was clear that she was not just knowledgeable, but also confident and intelligent, able to handle unexpected challenges with poise. The tourist, who had entered the cafe with a sense of superiority and expectation, now found himself humbled. He realized that he had underestimated the waitress, assuming that a simple challenge in a rare language would easily demonstrate his own superiority. Instead, he was met with a display of talent, grace, and knowledge that he had not anticipated. There was a quiet respect in his eyes now, a recognition that true skill often appears in unexpected forms. Meanwhile, other staff members and regular customers had begun to take notice. The barista, who had been busy preparing coffee, paused for a moment, glancing at the scene with wide eyes. A group of tourists at a nearby table leaned in, eager to witness the interaction. The young waitress handled each subsequent question with the same calm and precision, her answers flowing naturally, leaving the audience in awe. It was more than just language skill on display. Her demeanor, her calm and respectful approach, and the way she carried herself all added to the impression she made. She was not showing off or seeking attention. She was simply demonstrating her ability and knowledge in a moment that demanded it. The tourist, sensing the growing admiration of the cafe patrons, finally paused and nodded slowly, acknowledging her talent. It was a quiet moment of mutual respect, spoken without words, but understood by everyone present. The interaction continued for a few more minutes, with the tourist posing a few final, slightly simpler questions, which she answered effortlessly. Patrons began to relax, some returning to their drinks, others smiling quietly to themselves, still impressed by the display they had just witnessed. The young waitress returned to her regular duties, serving coffee and pastries with the same calm professionalism. But there was a subtle shift in the cafe's atmosphere. People carried a sense of wonder and admiration, a quiet energy that lingered long after the tourist had left. As the afternoon moved toward evening, the cafe slowly resumed its normal rhythm. The story of the challenge spread quietly among the patrons, with whispers of amazement and curiosity. Many people who had been present would remember this encounter for days, sharing it with friends and family, recounting the moment when a young waitress met an unexpected test with intelligence, grace, and confidence. The tourist eventually left the cafe, his demeanor transformed. He walked away with a thoughtful expression, humbled and impressed by what he had witnessed. The young waitress, unaware of the lasting impression she had made on him, continued her work with the same dedication and calmness. Her hidden talent, once revealed, had captured the attention and admiration of everyone in the cafe, leaving a quiet but lasting impact. It was a moment that reminded everyone present that extraordinary skill often appears in the most ordinary places. A simple cafe, a young waitress, and a chance encounter had created a memory that would linger in the minds of those who witnessed it. The interaction was not about proving superiority or gaining recognition. It was about demonstrating calm, intelligence, and the quiet power of knowledge. The cafe, once an ordinary space, had become a stage for an unforgettable moment of human talent and dignity, leaving everyone silent in admiration. The quiet hum of the cafe returned after the tourists' first few questions, but a sense of anticipation still lingered in the air. Patrons who had been watching the interaction closely could feel that the story was far from over. There was a spark in the atmosphere, subtle yet noticeable, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The young waitress moved among the tables, her calm presence giving the cafe a sense of order and warmth, but her mind was alert, ready for any challenge that might come her way. The tourist, though initially confident, was now visibly intrigued. He had expected a nervous, unprepared response, but instead, he had encountered someone who matched his challenge with poise and knowledge. A smile played on his lips, not one of superiority this time, but of curiosity. He leaned slightly toward the counter, opening a small notebook he had brought with him. Its pages were filled with phrases and uncommon words in the rare language, carefully collected from books and conversations he had encountered during his travels. He spoke again, clearly and deliberately, choosing words that were both complex and nuanced. His tone carried a sense of challenge, but beneath it was genuine interest. He wanted to see if her skill extended beyond the first few questions, if her knowledge was deep and real. The young waitress listened intently, her posture straight but relaxed, her eyes focused on him. She did not appear anxious or pressured. Instead, she gave off a quiet confidence that drew the attention of everyone in the cafe. The patrons watched closely, some holding their cups mid-sip, others leaning forward in their chairs. Whispers traveled quietly through the air. "How does she know that?" And, "I've never seen anything like this." Each word the waitress spoke in response was precise, clear, and carried the weight of someone who had studied the language thoroughly. The tourist's expression changed from curiosity to genuine admiration. He began to realize that this was not a simple act of memorization. This was skill honed through dedication and understanding. He decided to push a little further, formulating a question that required not only fluency but also comprehension and quick thinking. The waitress caught every subtle nuance of his words, processing them carefully. For a brief moment, there was silence, but it was not the silence of hesitation. It was the silence of calculation and thought. Then, she responded, perfectly structured and meaningful, leaving no room for doubt or error. A collective gasp, almost imperceptible, moved through the cafe. Patrons exchanged glances, some smiling in amazement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The young waitress had turned what could have been an ordinary encounter into something extraordinary. Her calm, measured responses captivated everyone, not because she was showing off, but because she demonstrated mastery and confidence that was rare and unexpected. The tourist, feeling a mix of surprise and respect, nodded slowly. He had come expecting a challenge, perhaps to impress or intimidate, but instead he found himself humbled. He had underestimated the young woman, assuming that her role as a waitress limited her abilities. Now, he was faced with undeniable proof that talent and intelligence often exist in unexpected places, hidden beneath ordinary appearances. As he prepared his next question, the young waitress continued her work seamlessly. She balanced the roles of server and skilled communicator with remarkable ease. Patrons observed not only her language skills but also her composure under pressure. She was polite, attentive, and professional, never allowing the challenge to disrupt her duties or the comfort of the cafe. This combination of intelligence, skill, and grace left a lasting impression on everyone present. The tourist asked another question, slightly more obscure, testing the depth of her knowledge. She listened carefully, weighing her words before responding, and once again delivered a perfect answer. Patrons began to murmur in quiet admiration, some nodding their heads, others exchanging astonished looks. The young waitress had transformed the cafe into a scene of unexpected brilliance. Her ability to navigate the challenge effortlessly drew attention not because she sought it, but because her skill demanded recognition. The cafe staff and regular customers began to notice the shift in energy. The barista paused mid-step, the baker looked over from the kitchen window, and a few regular patrons leaned closer to the counter to observe. Everyone could feel the quiet awe in the room. The young waitress, with her calm confidence, had become the center of attention not by choice, but by the undeniable power of her knowledge and poise. The tourist, fully aware of the admiration she had earned, decided to ask a final question. It was complex, layered with subtle meanings, intended to be the ultimate test of her understanding. The young waitress took a deep breath, her focus unwavering. She processed the question, considering not only the words but the intent behind them. Her response was flawless, a perfect blend of language, clarity, and insight. A hush fell over the cafe. Patrons, who had been quietly whispering, now sat in stunned silence. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smiled softly, acknowledging the rare display they had witnessed. The tourist, looking genuinely impressed, nodded in acknowledgement, a quiet sign of respect for her skill. The young waitress, maintaining her gentle smile, continued her work, unfazed by the attention, her humility adding to the admiration she had earned. Word of the encounter began to spread quietly among the patrons. Conversations at nearby tables shifted to whispers about the young waitress's incredible ability. Some were curious, asking others if they knew how she had learned such a rare language. She remained humble, responding with modesty, never boasting about her knowledge, allowing her actions and words to speak for themselves. The tourist finally stood, closing his notebook and offering a respectful nod. He had entered the cafe expecting to assert his superiority, but was leaving with a newfound appreciation for the unexpected brilliance he had encountered. The young waitress had not only met his challenge but had done so with a level of skill, poise, and professionalism that left an unforgettable impression. As the day progressed and sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows across the cafe floor, the energy lingered. Patrons returned to their drinks and quiet conversations, but the story of the young waitress's perfect replies and calm confidence had already taken root. It would be recounted to friends, remembered with awe, and shared as an example of talent revealed in ordinary places. The young waitress moved through the cafe with ease, her attention divided between serving customers and maintaining the quiet dignity that had impressed everyone. Her hidden skill, revealed in the face of an unexpected challenge, had transformed an ordinary afternoon into a moment of silent admiration. Patrons, staff, and even the tourist carried with them the memory of her composure and intelligence, a reminder that extraordinary abilities often lie quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to shine. The quiet energy in the cafe began to shift as the young waitress moved from table to table, carrying drinks and pastries with a gentle efficiency that seemed effortless. Her poise and calmness, which had already caught the attention of everyone, now carried an air of quiet authority. Patrons who had been watching the interaction with the tourist could not help but notice the way she carried herself, each movement deliberate yet natural, a reflection of her confidence and skill. The tourist, who had been leaning slightly against the counter, notebook closed, now regarded her with a different expression. Gone was the initial air of superiority, replaced by curiosity and genuine admiration. He had tested her, expecting hesitation or confusion, but instead had met someone who navigated his complex language questions with ease and grace. It was not just her knowledge that impressed him but the way she handled it. Politely, confidently, and without seeking attention. He realized that he had underestimated the young waitress, assuming that her job limited her abilities. Now, he understood that her role in the cafe did not define her talent. A few patrons, curious about how she had acquired such skill, began to ask questions quietly, their voices soft so as not to interrupt the atmosphere of calm that the cafe had regained. They were eager to know her story, to understand how someone so young could possess such knowledge of a rare and complex language. The waitress, with a gentle smile, responded to a few of these whispers, explaining in simple words that she had learned the language from her grandfather. He had been passionate about preserving it, teaching her the beauty of the words and their proper use, sharing stories and phrases from his own experiences. It had become a cherished part of her upbringing, a hidden talent that she had carried quietly for years. The patrons listened intently, nodding in appreciation. They were fascinated by the idea that such a skill could exist quietly, tucked away in someone who appeared so ordinary. The young waitress's humility made the story even more compelling. She did not boast or seek recognition. She simply shared her knowledge when the moment demanded it. The tourist, now seated at a nearby table, listened with genuine interest, clearly moved by the revelation. His earlier challenge had become an opportunity to witness the depth of her character and the richness of her background. Word began to spread subtly through the cafe, whispers of admiration traveling from table to table. The staff, who had watched the exchange unfold, began to view the young waitress with renewed respect. The barista, previously preoccupied with steaming milk, paused to glance at her, a quiet smile of acknowledgement passing between them. The regular customers, too, shared knowing glances, appreciating the moment for what it was. A rare glimpse into someone's hidden talent revealed in a way that was both authentic and inspiring. The tourist, feeling a mix of respect and humility, decided to express his appreciation. He called her over, speaking politely and kindly. He thanked her for her patience, her skill, and her gracious handling of his unexpected questions. His words were genuine, reflecting a shift in his perception from one of challenge and superiority to admiration and respect. The young waitress nodded, accepting his words with quiet grace, her demeanor unchanged by the praise. She had done what she set out to do: meet the challenge with confidence, maintain professionalism, and reveal her knowledge without arrogance. As the interaction continued, a few more patrons gathered near the counter, curious to witness the final exchange. The tourist, sensing that he had learned as much from the encounter as he had hoped to test, offered a final compliment. He acknowledged her remarkable talent and expressed how impressed he was by her ability to remain composed under pressure. The cafe, now a mix of quiet conversation and attentive observation, seemed to hold its breath as she responded with a simple, heartfelt thank you. Her humility added to the impression she had left on everyone present. The young waitress continued her work, moving from table to table with the same care and attention she had always shown. Patrons returned to their drinks and conversations, but the story of the interaction lingered in the air. Whispers of admiration and curiosity flowed quietly, creating a sense of connection among the customers. It was not just a story about a rare language or a test. It was a story about character, patience, and the quiet power of knowledge revealed in the right moment. The tourist prepared to leave, gathering his belongings with a thoughtful expression. He paused at the counter, offering one last nod of respect to the young waitress. There was an unspoken understanding between them. He had come expecting to challenge, but he was leaving with a deeper appreciation for her talent, her grace, and the calm strength she had displayed. The young waitress, with her gentle smile, returned the acknowledgement, maintaining the same humble demeanor that had defined her throughout the encounter. As he walked out of the cafe, the patrons resumed their activities, but the energy in the room had shifted. The story of the young waitress and her perfect replies had already begun to circulate quietly, becoming part of the cafe's atmosphere. People who had witnessed the event would remember it for days, sharing it with friends and family, retelling the moment when talent, humility, and grace combined to create an unforgettable experience. The young waitress, unaware of the lasting impression she had made, continued her duties with dedication and focus. She served each customer with the same care and attention, her quiet confidence shining through in her interactions. The cafe, once an ordinary space, had become a stage for an extraordinary display of skill and character, leaving everyone who had witnessed it in silent admiration. Throughout the remainder of the afternoon, patrons came and went, each encounter carrying a subtle sense of awe and respect for the young waitress. Some returned to the counter to speak to her briefly, asking questions or offering quiet compliments. Others simply observed from their tables, appreciating the calm competence and intelligence she exhibited. The atmosphere of the cafe had been transformed, not by a loud or dramatic display, but by the quiet power of her skill and the genuine humanity she displayed. As evening approached, the sunlight shifted, casting a warm, golden glow across the wooden floors and tables. The young waitress continued her work, her presence a steady and reassuring force in the cafe. Patrons lingered a little longer, savoring not only their drinks and pastries but also the rare opportunity to witness something remarkable. The tourist's visit had ended, but the memory of the encounter, the revelation of her talent, and the admiration it inspired remained alive in the space. The story of the young waitress and her ability to respond perfectly in a rare language would continue to spread quietly among the patrons. Some would share it with friends, others would remember it as a highlight of their day. It was a reminder that extraordinary skills often exist in the most ordinary places, waiting for the right moment to shine. The young waitress, through her calm, intelligent, and humble approach, had created a lasting impression that went beyond words, leaving everyone in the cafe silently inspired and deeply moved. Even as the day moved toward evening, the cafe retained a quiet sense of wonder that had begun earlier. The young waitress continued to move gracefully between tables, her actions fluid and confident, serving drinks, clearing dishes, and smiling warmly at each customer. Though she carried on with her duties, there was a subtle change in the air, a shared feeling among patrons that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The story of her perfect replies to the tourists' challenges had spread quietly, creating a ripple of admiration and curiosity. Some of the patrons who had arrived later, unaware of the earlier events, asked about the small crowd near the counter and the focused expressions of those nearby. They were told, in hushed and excited whispers, about the tourist who had tested the young waitress in a rare language and how she had answered perfectly each time. The newcomers listened in awe, and a few even returned to their tables, sharing the story with friends who had come with them. The cafe, once a simple place to enjoy a cup of coffee, had become a setting for a story of talent and quiet brilliance. The tourist, now seated near the window, seemed contemplative. He had come expecting a simple challenge and perhaps a moment of superiority, but he left with a deep appreciation for the young waitress. He watched her work, noting her calmness, attention to detail, and the warmth she brought to her interactions. His admiration was evident, though he did not interrupt her, choosing instead to observe silently, understanding that this moment was not about recognition, but about witnessing genuine skill and character. Some patrons approached her with questions, eager to learn more about the rare language she spoke. She responded modestly, explaining how her grandfather had taught her, emphasizing the importance of listening carefully and understanding the meaning behind the words. Her humility only added to the respect she inspired. Patrons who had witnessed the interaction smiled, seeing that her talent was not just about the ability to speak a rare language, but also about the grace and thoughtfulness with which she approached it. The tourist eventually approached her, holding out a hand in a gesture of respect. He thanked her sincerely for her patience, her knowledge, and the way she handled his unexpected questions. There was no arrogance in his voice, only genuine appreciation. The young waitress accepted the acknowledgement with a simple nod and a quiet smile. She did not seek praise, but the way she carried herself conveyed a natural dignity that was felt by everyone around her. As the evening shadows grew longer, the cafe began to fill with a gentle, relaxed energy. Patrons returned to their conversations, but the sense of admiration remained. Some lingered near the counter, curious to witness her calm efficiency, while others discussed the earlier events in low tones. It was a shared moment of appreciation, not for spectacle, but for the quiet demonstration of skill and intelligence in an unexpected place. The young waitress continued her work, serving each customer with care, never showing signs of fatigue or distraction. Her composure and calmness under the subtle pressure of attention made a lasting impression on those present. Patrons began to understand that true talent often does not announce itself loudly. Instead, it emerges naturally, in the right moment, and leaves a lasting impact through quiet confidence and mastery. As the cafe began to empty, the tourist rose to leave. He paused briefly at the door, casting a final glance at the young waitress. There was a mutual understanding, an unspoken recognition of the unique encounter they had shared. He left the cafe, thoughtful and humbled, carrying with him the memory of her intelligence, poise, and grace. Patrons who had observed the scene continued to talk quietly among themselves, sharing the story and marveling at the young waitress's remarkable skill. The young waitress returned to her duties, carrying herself with the same calm focus she had maintained throughout the day. Patrons who had witnessed the earlier events left with a renewed sense of admiration, some taking a moment to leave generous tips or kind words, recognizing not only her skill but the character she had displayed. She remained humble, continuing to serve with dedication, her presence quietly commanding respect and appreciation. Even as night fell, the story of the day lingered in the cafe. Staff members exchanged quiet smiles, acknowledging the rare moment they had witnessed. Regular patrons reflected on the young waitress's ability to handle the challenge with grace, and new customers, having heard the story, arrived with curiosity and respect. It was clear that her actions had transformed the cafe from a simple place of service into a space where talent and character had been celebrated. The young waitress, unaware of the lasting impact she had made on the tourist, the patrons, and even the cafe staff, continued her work as though it were any other day. Her dedication, skill, and humility had left an impression on everyone who had been present, creating a memory that would be shared long after the cafe had emptied. Her story would travel beyond the walls of the cafe, quietly inspiring others to recognize that extraordinary talent often resides in ordinary people, revealed in moments that demand it most. As the evening came to a close and the last customers left, the young waitress took a moment to tidy the cafe. She moved with care and precision, her thoughts calm and reflective. Though the day had brought unexpected attention and admiration, she felt no need for recognition. Her satisfaction came from having done her work well, having met a challenge with confidence, and having maintained the grace and humility that defined her character. In the quiet that followed, the cafe seemed to hold the memory of the events that had unfolded. The soft lighting, the lingering aroma of coffee and pastries, and the gentle echoes of conversation carried with them the story of the young waitress and her extraordinary skill. It was a story of talent, humility, and quiet brilliance that had touched everyone who had been present, leaving a lasting impression that would be remembered and retold for days to come. The day had begun like any other, with the usual rhythm of a busy cafe. But through a chance encounter with a curious tourist and the challenge of a rare language, it had become something memorable. The young waitress had demonstrated that true talent is not always visible at first glance. It is found in those who carry their knowledge and skill quietly, ready to reveal it when the moment calls. Her perfect replies had left the cafe silent, her calm confidence inspiring admiration, and her humility ensuring that the impression she made would be both powerful and lasting. As the cafe doors closed for the night, the young waitress stood quietly, reflecting on the day. She thought of the tourist who had challenged her, the patrons who had watched in awe, and the staff who had witnessed her poise. She realized, perhaps without words, that extraordinary moments often arise in ordinary places, and that the quiet demonstration of skill and character can have a far-reaching impact. The memory of her calm, perfect responses, and the admiration they inspired would continue to live in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed them, a testament to the power of humility, intelligence, and grace.